There was a wealthy farmer who owned a lot of land in Ohio. He built a new barn on his property every time his wife had a baby. He named the barns after each of his children, and by the time this story takes place, they had 6 kids and were expecting number 7. However, the farmer's wife died in childbirth, and so did her unborn baby. The farmer went insane with grief and couldn't tend to his farm. So the family had no money and the farm started going under. They say that one night, in the depths of his darkness and despair, the farmer took an axe and led his children out to the barns where he murdered them, one by one. He buried each of their bodies in the 6 barns that had been named after them. Then he went to the 7th barn where he hanged himself. All of the barns were eventually torn down and the land was sold off, all except for the 7th barn. Nobody wanted to buy the land because of what happened there, so it was abandoned and soon fell into disrepair. They say if you go to the barn at night, you can see the ghost of the farmer hanging from the rafters, his body swinging back and forth in the wind, dwelling on his terrible crime for all eternity. No one was ever really sure where the 7th barn was located, although it was definitely in Ohio. Some said it was the Crane's farm in Cuyahoga Valley, and others said it was at Top of the World in Northampton. In 1997, a local Ohio teacher claimed he had finally managed to track down the real location of the infamous 7th barn. He said that none of the barns had ever actually been torn down. The land had just been divided up and sold off, and the barns had simply been incorporated into neighboring farms. According to the teacher, he was able to pinpoint the correct location because all of the barns on neighboring properties had nameplates above the doors with the names of the children engraved on them. The teacher and his son set out one night to visit the barn, and they brought a video camera with them, and they were hoping that they would capture some paranormal activity. The next morning, the teacher's wife reported her husband and son missing. Police found their abandoned car by the roadside. While searching the area, they entered a barn in a nearby field and found the dead bodies of the teacher and his son hanging from the rafters. This is the Buckley family. The children's names were Susan and John, and as a Halloween joke, the kids in the neighborhood were going to get a dummy and pretend to chop its head off. The Buckley children thought that it would be hilarious to actually kill their mother, so when the kids walked up the door, they got an axe and they slaughtered her. Once everyone figured out what they had done, they called the police, but the kids were long gone by then. The only picture of them was this photo taken by a trick-or-treater. The mother's body was found half-eaten. This photograph has been posted on various websites on the internet with the accompanying text, but it's not true. Here is the real story. This image is actually called Midwestern Matricide, and it's the work of Eddie Allen from Haunted Memories, and he retouches old photos and he gives them a horrifying twist. And I actually have about 1 or 2 of his photos. But in this case, he took a normal photo of 2 children and their mother, and he made it look like they had murdered her. So if you look at the original photo, you will see that the mother's head is still on her shoulders, and the daughter isn't holding an axe. A few years ago, an email did the rounds warning people about a cunning serial killer who used a terrifying trick to lure his victim out of the safety of their homes and into his clutches. One night, a middle-aged woman was sitting at home and she was reading the newspaper. Her husband worked nights, which meant that she was often alone. It was getting late and she was about to go to bed when she heard a strange noise outside. It sounded like a crying baby and seemed to be coming from the bushes outside of her front door. She thought it was very weird, but she was tempted to go out and investigate. Her dog jumped to its feet and began barking and growling at the door, and the woman got a strange and uneasy feeling, so she stopped in her tracks and she decided to call the police instead. When she told them she heard the sound of a crying baby, the police said, "We'll be right over. Whatever you do, do not open your door." The lady hung up the phone, and minutes later she heard the sound of sirens as 2 police cars pulled into her driveway. One policeman banged on her door while the others searched the bushes outside of her house. She opened her front door and she let the police in, and he was holding a doll in his arms, and she noticed that it had a tape recorder in its belly. The policeman pressed play on the tape recorder, and they both heard the sound of a baby crying. He explained that there was a serial killer on the loose who was targeting women who were alone at night, and he was using a cunning trick to fool the women into opening their front doors and coming outside. He would hide in the bushes and play a tape of a baby crying. The recording of the baby's cries would make the women think that there was a child in need, and they would come out of their homes to help. And while they were looking for the source of the cries, the killer would emerge from the bushes and murder them. The officer told her that in the past few days they had received several calls from women saying that they heard a baby crying outside their homes when they were alone at night. The killer had already murdered 2 women in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and if it hadn't been for her dog warning her of danger, she might have become the next victim. I had a best friend, and his name was Billy. We went to school together, and we hung out all of the time. Then one day he stopped coming to school, and I didn't see him for weeks. There were rumors that he had suffered a nervous breakdown. So one evening, when my parents were out, there was a knock on the door. When I answered it, Billy was standing there, and he was acting very strangely. His eyes were tired and bloodshot, and he looked like he was very nervous. He kept looking around and glancing over his shoulder, and he said, "I need to talk to you." I invited him in and closed the door, and he sat down on the couch, but he couldn't relax. Something was really bothering him. He was twitching, and his leg was shaking. "Are you okay?" I asked. "My parents think I'm crazy," he said. "Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Even I thought I was crazy for a while." And I asked him, "And are you crazy?" He let out a humorless chuckle, and then he looked out the window. He said, "Look out the window." And I said, "Why?" "Just look. Do me a favor. Look out the window and tell me what you see." I decided to humor him, so I opened the curtains and I looked out. He asked me, "What did I see?" I said, "I see some houses, some cars, some street lights." "Exactly. And you don't see anything strange?" No," I said. "You see those street lights? They're supposed to be on, but they're not. They're all off. How could every light on the street be off? Who do you think did that?" "I don't know." "Who?" Billy lowered his voice and he whispered, "The Thin Man." "What are you talking about?" "I heard rumors about him before," Billy said, "but I thought it was just an urban legend. But it's not. The Thin Man is real. He hates the streetlights. He looks just like a normal man at first, but when he unfolds himself, he's really tall and really thin, just like a streetlight. And he's all dressed in gray, just like a streetlight. He hides behind them. When it starts to get dark outside and the streetlights aren't on, you wouldn't even know he was there." "How do you know all of this?" I asked him. "Because I've seen him." "When?" "A few weeks ago. I was kicking a football in the park, and I accidentally kicked it in the bushes. I went in to get it, and that's when I saw him. Just like an ordinary man standing in the street. He was looking up and down the block, and then, when he thought nobody was watching, he just sort of unfolded himself. He turned into something tall and thin, and he hid behind the streetlight. All of a sudden, I heard a click, and the light went out. Then he just sort of slid to the next streetlight, and I heard another click, and that one went out too. He did it all down the block. You would hear it click, he would slide to the next one. You would hear it click, he would slide to the next one, until all of the lights were out. That's when he noticed me. All of a sudden, our eyes met, and I knew that he had seen me, and he knew that I had seen him. I just started running, and I didn't look back. When I got home, I locked all of the doors. For a long time after that, I was too afraid to leave the house. Then I realized that it was only dangerous at night. It's usually safe during the day because he hates being seen. Nobody believes me. My parents took me to a psychiatrist, and she didn't believe me either. Do you believe me? Sure. No, you don't, he said. Anyway, even if you don't believe me, I thought I better tell you, because you're my best friend. And with that, he said goodbye. At the front door, he looked all around to make sure that it was safe, and then he took off running. I watched him until he was out of sight, and then I went back inside. I felt really sad. I felt like my best friend had lost his mind. That was until the next morning when the police found Billy. He had been folded. There was no blood, no guts, but every bone in his body had been broken. He had been folded up into a tiny little bundle. The police didn't even know what they'd found at first until they picked it up and they saw his flattened face. His mother had to go down to the police station to identify him, and when they brought her into the room to show her his remains, she fainted. He was just a tiny bundle of flesh and bone and clothes and hair, and he had been folded. Ever since I heard the news, I've been on edge. I can't stop thinking about the crazy things Billy told me. Suddenly they don't seem so crazy. I haven't been able to sleep. I'm tired and my eyes are bloodshot. I'm nervous all the time, and I always find myself looking over my shoulder. This morning when I left for school, I counted the street lamps on my road. When I came home this evening, I counted them again. There was one too many. Rezo Seres was born in Hungary in 1933. He was a struggling composer who had never written a hit song, and after his girlfriend left him, he was so depressed that he wrote a song that made him famous. Originally, the song was titled The End of the World, but later it was retitled Gloomy Sunday. At first, music publishers didn't want anything to do with the song, saying that it was too depressing, and eventually it was released and it became a huge success. He was so delighted to have finally written a hit song that he contacted the ex-girlfriend who inspired the song, and he attempted to get her back. The next day, she took her life by swallowing poison, and she left a note that said, Gloomy Sunday. As time went on, Gloomy Sunday was connected to a rash of suicides in Hungary. In all, 17 people died. 2 shot themselves while listening to a band playing the song, while others drowned themselves in a river while holding the sheet music in their hand. People referred to it as the suicide song, and there were rumors that it was cursed. The Hungarian authorities even banned the song from being played in public. In Berlin, a young shopkeeper hanged herself. Beneath her feet, they found a copy of Gloomy Sunday. In New York, a secretary gassed herself, leaving behind her a request that Gloomy Sunday be played at her funeral. In Vienna, a teenage girl drowned herself while clutching the sheet music. In Budapest, a shopkeeper killed himself and left a note that contained the lyrics of the song. In London, a woman took an overdose of pills while listening to the record over and over. The song's eerie reputation quickly spread around the world, and music publishers from America decided to cash in on its notoriety, and they released an English translation of the song, and it soon caught on. More deaths followed. One man reportedly walked into a nightclub and he asked the band to play the song. Then he took out a gun and shot himself in the head. An 82-year-old man put Gloomy Sunday on his record player, and then he jumped out of a 7th-story window. In Rome, an errand boy was cycling down the street when he heard a beggar humming the tune. The boy parked his bicycle, walked over to the beggar, and gave him all of his money. Then he jumped off a nearby bridge and drowned in the icy waters. In the early 40s, the song was banned in England because it was deemed too upsetting for the public. The ban was lifted in 2002. Even the song's composer could not escape the curse. Rezo Seres was haunted by all of the death and destruction that his music had caused, and he said that I stand in the midst of this deadly success as an accused man, and this fatal fame hurts me. I cried all of the disappointments of my heart into this song, and it seems that others with feelings like mine have found their own hurt in it. In 1968, he committed by jumping out the window of his Budapest apartment building. Over the years, the song has been recorded by several artists, including Billie Holiday, Ray Charles, Sinead O'Connor, Elvis Costello, Sarah McLachlan, and Sarah Brightman. If you decide to listen to the song, be very careful. There used to be a road that was known by locals as the Never-Ending Road. Some say it was Leicester Road in Corona, California, and others say it was a road in Alberta, Canada. Anyway, it was a long, winding road, and it was unlit and bordered a thick forest that led through the mountains. According to the legend, many people who drove down the road at night were never seen or heard from again. The legend of the Never-Ending Road became so well known that a lot of people were even afraid to drive on it during the daytime. Some would even lose their nerve and turn around because they were terrified that if they continued along the road, they would never return. The road took a sharp turn at one point and it curved around a large canyon. There were no guardrails on the turn, and on the other side of the canyon, the road continued. One summer, a work crew was widening the road when they made a gruesome discovery. One of the workmen pushed a rock over the side of the mountain and he heard it hit something metal. When they went down to take a look, they found dozens of crashed cars at the bottom. They had all fallen to their doom, and the decomposing bodies and skeletal remains of the victims were still strapped into their seats. It was discovered that the roads on either side of the canyon lined up so well that when viewed from the correct angle, especially at night, it created an optical illusion. The canyon was almost invisible, and the road seemed to continue on up and over the hill on the other side of the canyon. So people who drove down the road at night didn't have any idea that there was a huge drop in front of them until it was too late. And they say that local law enforcement hushed up the discovery, wanting to avoid a scandal, and the road was quietly closed down, never to be reopened. And the corpses of the dead were never able to be recovered, and to this very day they are still down there, strapped in their seats, in their twisted metal graves.